Imagine one of our distant human ancestors standing beneath a brutal African sun. The heat presses down with no relief. There is no shade, no breeze, only open land stretching in every direction. Now compare that body with most other mammals. Gorillas have dense fur, chimpanzees do too, baboons as well. Yet somewhere along the human lineage, something unusual happened. We became far less hairy. As our body hair became reduced, humans also evolved an unusually high density of sweat glands that allow us to lose heat through evaporation. That may have been extremely useful. A heavily furred body could trap heat, making sustained activity in warm environments more difficult. But a more lightly covered body could potentially cool more efficiently during movement. This becomes especially interesting when we consider endurance activity. Under certain conditions, early humans may have been able to keep moving long after other animals began struggling with heat. The animal sprints, the human follows. The animal pauses to recover, the human continues, the cycle repeats. Under the right conditions, the prey could eventually overheat while the human hunter remained capable of sustained movement. This idea is often connected to endurance hunting, but it is only one hypothesis. Other factors may also have influenced hair loss, including parasite reduction, sexual selection, and environmental adaptation. So, reduced body hair probably cannot be explained by one simple evolutionary pressure. But then comes the strange part. If humans gradually lost most of their body hair, why did one specific region remain, and in some cases become dramatically more pronounced? The human face. More specifically, adult males can develop thick, coarse facial hair along the jaw and chin. This isn't simply leftover fur. Humans still have hair follicles across most of the skin, but many produce tiny, nearly invisible vellus hairs instead of dense fur. The beard is different. It emerges later in life. It thickens under hormonal influence, and it appears most prominently in one sex. That makes it a particularly unusual human trait, and its exact evolutionary purpose is still debated. So if losing body hair may have helped humans adapt to heat and survival, why did evolution preserve, and in adult males, dramatically develop such a distinctive patch of facial hair? The first clue is that humans didn't actually lose every hair follicle. Look closely at your arm. Even skin that appears completely bare contains thousands of tiny follicles. They still produce hair. It's simply much finer, shorter, and lighter than the thick coat carried by our primate relatives. This distinction is important. Human evolution did not erase the machinery that produces hair. Instead, many follicles began producing much finer hairs, with different growth patterns and hormonal responses, rather than simply being turned off. Across the body, follicles began producing vellus hair instead of the long, coarse hairs associated with a dense coat. So, humans became visually hairless without becoming literally hairless. And that makes the beard even more interesting. The follicles on your jaw haven't been sitting there waiting to disappear. They respond differently. As boys enter puberty, rising levels of androgens begin affecting hair follicles throughout the body. But those follicles don't all interpret the hormonal signal in the same way. On the jaw and chin, the response can be dramatic. Fine hairs become thicker. They become darker. They grow longer. A previously smooth-looking face gradually develops a beard. On other parts of the body, the response may be weaker. And the same hormonal environment can contribute to the opposite effect on the scalp in some men. Hair follicles become smaller and produce progressively thinner hairs. One hormone, different regions, different outcomes. That tells us something important. The human body isn't operating with one universal instruction for hair. Different areas appear to have their own biological settings. And the beard has another unusual characteristic. It doesn't appear immediately when a boy reaches puberty. It develops progressively. For some men, substantial facial hair doesn't appear until years into adulthood. So the beard isn't simply a marker of puberty. It may also provide information about age and physical maturity. Imagine a small human community where a stranger approaches from a distance. Before anyone knows his name, his history, or his abilities, his face is already visible. Age, sex, physical maturity, all of those impressions can begin forming before a single word is spoken. And that brings us to the most intriguing possibility. Maybe the beard wasn't primarily preserved because it kept the face warm. Maybe it survived because other humans were looking at it. But if the beard was really functioning as a social signal, there should be evidence of what people were actually reading from it. And one fascinating line of research points toward perceptions of dominance, strength, and aggression. If facial hair evolved mainly because it served a social purpose, then we can start with a simple question. What do people actually perceive when they see a bearded face? Researchers have explored this from multiple angles, and the findings are not straightforward. There is no single universal preference. Some people rate clean-shaven faces as more attractive. Others prefer light stubble. In some cases, fuller beards are judged more positively. And these preferences can shift across cultures, time periods, and personal experience. So the idea that beards evolved simply because women consistently preferred them is too simplistic to explain the full picture. However, Another pattern appears more consistently in research. Bearded male faces are often perceived as older, stronger, more dominant, and more aggressive. That is a very different kind of signal. It does not necessarily communicate, "I am attractive." Instead, it can communicate, "I am an adult male who may be difficult to challenge." And in a small prehistoric community, that distinction could matter. There were no police officers or courts to reliably prevent conflict. A serious fight could leave a man injured, unable to hunt, or unable to protect himself. A damaged jaw could make eating painful. Infection could become life-threatening. Even winning a fight could leave someone too injured to function normally. So avoiding unnecessary conflict could be just as important as winning. This is where visual signals become powerful. Many animals use appearance to influence rivals before physical confrontation begins. Gorillas increase their apparent size through posture. Some mammals grow horns or antlers that signal strength. Certain primates use facial coloration or body displays to communicate status. The message is often similar: decide carefully before you challenge me. A beard may have functioned in a similar way. Dense hair around the jaw can make the lower face appear larger and more substantial. It can change how the structure of the face is perceived, making it look heavier and more imposing. If another individual interprets that appearance as a sign of maturity, strength, or aggression, it could influence behavior before a confrontation begins. But there is another possibility. It might also have had a small physical protective effect, because the jaw is one of the most vulnerable areas in a fight. And when researchers began asking whether facial hair could actually soften or absorb some impact, the beard stopped looking like simple decoration and started looking like a feature with a surprisingly practical possibility. The idea sounds strange at first. A beard as protection? Not a helmet, not armor, just hair. But the location makes the question worth asking. The lower face is exposed. The jaw sits directly at the front of the head, and during close combat, it can become an obvious target. A powerful strike to the jaw can cause serious injury. So researchers began asking whether thick facial hair might do more than change appearance. Could it actually reduce the force reaching the skin and bone underneath? One experimental approach used a material designed to imitate the basic structure of a human face. Researchers compared surfaces with different amounts of hair and subjected them to controlled impacts. The results suggested that thicker hair could reduce and redistribute some impact energy reaching the underlying material. However, this was a laboratory model, not a real human face, and it cannot reproduce the complexity of actual combat. That does not mean a beard is natural armor. It doesn't make someone immune to injury. A powerful impact can still damage the jaw, regardless of facial hair. And importantly, the experiment cannot tell us whether protection was actually the reason beards evolved. But evolution can preserve traits when even small advantages affect survival or reproduction across many generations. Imagine two men involved in repeated physical conflicts. Neither has protective equipment, neither has modern medical care. In theory, one might receive slightly less damage from certain strikes because of thicker facial hair. He could recover more successfully. Maybe he can keep eating. Maybe he can continue hunting. Maybe he avoids an injury that would otherwise become disabling. The difference doesn't need to be dramatic. Even a small advantage could matter over many generations. But there's an important complication. If the beard offered protection, why did humans sometimes remove it? Stone tools could produce extremely sharp cutting edges, making facial hair removal possible long before metal razors existed. Later civilizations developed metal razors, making shaving easier and more widespread. Some cultures went further, removing facial and body hair for religious, social, or cultural reasons. So humans were clearly capable of deciding that the benefits of a beard weren't always worth its disadvantages. That suggests facial hair was never an absolute survival requirement. Its value depended on context. And once we accept that a beard could be useful in some situations but undesirable in others, a new question emerges. What social or environmental pressures would push humans to keep it, shape it, or remove it entirely? If a beard offered even a small advantage in protection or social signaling, you might expect ancient humans to simply keep it. But history shows the opposite. People spent enormous amounts of time removing facial hair. And they did it long before modern shaving technology existed. Stone tools made from materials such as flint or obsidian could produce extremely sharp cutting edges, making facial hair removal possible long before metal razors existed. Later, people developed specialized metal razors. Shaving became easier, but the motivation was often about more than convenience. In some societies, hair removal became connected to religion, cleanliness, social identity, or status. Ancient Egypt provides a particularly interesting example. Certain priests practiced extensive hair removal as part of ritual cleanliness. But Egyptian rulers could also appear with highly stylized beards, even when those beards were artificial. That detail is revealing. If a beard were purely biological protection, a manufactured beard would make little sense. But if the beard had become a symbol of authority, maturity, or status, then its physical reality mattered much less than what it represented. A beard could become a visual language, and people didn't only use facial hair to communicate their own identity. They could also manipulate someone else's identity. In the ancient world, forced shaving could be used as humiliation. Removing a man's beard could be used to strip away or publicly challenge symbols associated with adulthood, dignity, or status. The hair itself wasn't the important part. The message was. That brings us back to the evolutionary question. Perhaps there was never one single reason humans developed beards. A beard could influence how a person was perceived. It may have provided some limited physical protection, although that remains uncertain, and it could communicate age and maturity. Once humans developed complex societies, people could assign entirely new meanings to it. The same trait could therefore be useful in one environment and inconvenient in another. Humans evolved facial hair. Then humans invented tools to remove it. Then cultures developed rules about wearing it or not wearing it. The beard became something more than biology. It became behavior. And once humans began controlling it deliberately, facial hair entered a new stage of its history. But there's an even deeper clue hiding in all of this. Facial hair isn't unique to humans. And when we look at other primates, we find striking examples of facial hair and ornamentation that may serve surprisingly similar social functions. The beard becomes even more interesting when you stop looking at humans alone. Facial hair isn't some completely unique invention of our species. Other primates have developed their own dramatic facial features, and many share something important. They are most pronounced in males. Take the orangutan. Adult males can develop large cheek pads that dramatically change the shape of the face. These structures aren't present in the same way in every individual. Their development is strongly associated with maturity and hormonal changes, and their expression can vary between individuals and populations. Then there are mandrills. Their faces are covered in striking colors and patterns. Those colors aren't random decoration. They can provide information about sex, maturity, and individual condition. And perhaps the most famous example is the lion. Male lions develop a mane that can make the head and upper body appear substantially larger. It arrives after maturity rather than appearing immediately in infancy. The mane can be energetically expensive, it may increase heat retention, and it may even make movement through dense vegetation more difficult, yet it persists. Why? Because physical features don't necessarily need to make an animal better at hunting. Sometimes their value comes from what other animals think they mean. A rival sees the mane, another male sees the cheek pads. A mandrill sees the facial coloration, and before a fight begins, each animal has information about the individual standing in front of it. That can change the calculation. If an opponent appears larger, older, or more powerful, backing away may be safer than risking a potentially devastating fight. Humans don't have manes or enormous cheek pads, but our faces change dramatically during adulthood. The jaw becomes framed by thick hair. The apparent size of the lower face changes, and the visual difference between a young, clean-shaven male and an older, heavily bearded male can be obvious from a distance. That doesn't prove the beard evolved for dominance. Evolution rarely leaves us a label explaining why a trait exists, but the comparison with other primates makes one thing difficult to ignore. Facial features can become powerful social signals. And if a trait influences survival or reproductive success, natural selection can preserve it even when that trait carries costs. So perhaps the real mystery isn't simply why humans grew beards. It's why the hair became concentrated around one very specific part of the face, because that location may reveal what the beard was most likely to emphasize. Look closely at where a beard actually grows. It doesn't cover the entire face. The forehead remains mostly clear. The cheeks may have lighter hair. The eyes are completely exposed. Instead, the thickest growth tends to gather around the mouth, chin, and jawline. That pattern is surprisingly important. The mouth is one of the most expressive parts of the human face. It moves when we speak. It changes when we smile. It tightens when we're angry. And when a person feels threatened, the mouth can become part of an ancient display seen across many mammals, exposing the teeth. Teeth can be weapons. They are also signals. Across the animal kingdom, opening the mouth and exposing the teeth can communicate aggression, fear, or readiness to fight. Now imagine placing a dark, dense frame of hair around that same region. The contrast can make the mouth and lower face more visually prominent. The jaw may appear broader. The lower part of the head can look heavier. And from a distance, those changes could make movements and expressions of the lower face more visually distinctive. This doesn't prove that the beard evolved specifically to emphasize teeth. Evolutionary history rarely gives us that level of certainty. But the placement is consistent with the broader idea that facial hair can influence how the face is perceived. There's another reason the jaw is interesting. The jaw is one of the strongest structures in the human face, but it is also exposed. In close-range conflict, the lower face can receive powerful impacts. So the same patch of hair may have had multiple possible effects. It could change apparent size. It could emphasize facial expressions. It might provide limited cushioning against some impacts. And it could communicate adulthood or sex. Evolution can favor traits that perform more than one useful function. But there is a problem with this explanation. Not every human male grows the same beard. Some develop extremely dense facial hair. Others produce relatively sparse growth. Average facial hair density also varies among human populations. And cultural practices can remove it entirely. If the beard were essential for survival, this variation would be difficult to explain. Instead, the variation fits better with the idea of a trait whose value depends partly on social and environmental context. And that brings us to another fascinating piece of evidence. The human body contains different hair systems on the scalp, face, and body. Scalp hair can grow long. Beard hair grows differently. Body hair behaves differently again. The same basic follicle machinery has been modified in different regions for different purposes. And if the beard is controlled by such a specialized system, the next question becomes unavoidable. What biological switch tells a tiny follicle on your chin to grow thick hair while a nearly identical follicle elsewhere on your face stays almost invisible? The answer begins with puberty. Before puberty, the follicles on a boy's face usually produce very fine hairs. They are there, but they are barely noticeable. Then the body begins producing much higher levels of sex hormones called androgens. One of the most important is testosterone, but testosterone alone isn't the whole story. Inside certain tissues, testosterone can be converted into a more potent androgen called dihydrotestosterone, or DHT. And this is where things get fascinating. Different hair follicles respond differently to these hormones. A follicle on the jaw can respond strongly. The hair shaft becomes thicker. Its growth phase can change. The color becomes more noticeable. A tiny, almost invisible hair can gradually transform into coarse terminal hair. But another follicle exposed to the same hormonal environment may respond in a completely different way. That's why puberty can produce such strange combinations. A boy begins growing a beard. His chest hair becomes thicker. Hair appears in new places. Yet the same hormonal changes can contribute to scalp hair thinning in men who are genetically susceptible. So the body isn't simply receiving an instruction that says, grow more hair. It's more like a collection of regional switches. Some follicles are more sensitive to these signals, others respond weakly, some can eventually shrink under androgen influence, and the exact response depends heavily on genetics. This explains why two men of the same age can have completely different beards. One may develop dense facial hair during his late teens. Another may still have sparse growth years later. The hormones are not necessarily absent. The follicles themselves can differ in sensitivity. And that variation matters when we're thinking about evolution. The beard isn't controlled by one simple beard gene. It's influenced by multiple biological factors involving hormone production, hormone conversion, receptor sensitivity, follicle development, and genetics. That makes the trait surprisingly flexible. It can become thicker or lighter across populations without requiring humans to become fundamentally different animals. And there's another fascinating detail. The beard doesn't simply appear and stop. For many men, facial hair continues changing throughout adulthood. Density can increase. Individual hairs can become coarser. Color can change. Gray hairs can eventually replace darker ones. So the beard can continue changing in ways that may provide clues about a person's age. But if facial hair can change with hormones, age, and genetics, then perhaps the beard isn't just telling others that you're male, it may be broadcasting a much more detailed biological message without saying a single word. A beard can reveal simply whether someone is male. It can change with age, it can change with genetics, it can change with hormonal sensitivity. And even its texture and density can vary considerably from one person to another. That makes facial hair potentially useful as a visual signal. Think about a young boy. His face may be smooth because his follicles have not yet undergone the hormonal changes that transform fine facial hair into coarse terminal hair. Then puberty arrives. The jaw begins to darken, the chin fills in, the upper lip becomes more noticeable. Over time, the face starts looking unmistakably adult. That transformation doesn't happen instantly. It develops gradually. And because facial hair generally becomes more pronounced after puberty, people can use it as one of many visual clues about physical maturity. In a prehistoric community, those clues could have mattered. There were no birth certificates, no photographs, no official records showing exactly how old someone was. People had to estimate age from appearance and behavior. A person's face could therefore provide information before conversation even began. But the signal becomes more interesting when health enters the picture. Hair is produced by living tissue. Its growth depends on energy and nutrients. Serious illness, nutritional deficiencies, hormonal changes, and other biological disruptions can sometimes affect hair growth. That doesn't mean someone can diagnose health simply by looking at a beard. Human biology is far too complicated for that, but it does mean hair can reflect aspects of the body's internal condition. And in evolutionary terms, that raises the possibility of what biologists call an honest signal. A signal is more difficult to fake when producing or maintaining it requires real biological resources. A display that costs nothing would be easy for everyone to imitate, but a trait that requires energy, growth, and maintenance can potentially reveal something about the condition of the individual carrying it. This idea appears throughout the animal kingdom. Bright feathers, large antlers, elaborate plumage, complex displays. The signal works partly because producing and maintaining it has a cost. A beard may have some of these characteristics. It requires energy and growth. It takes time to maintain. And it may create disadvantages in certain environments or forms of physical conflict. Yet adult males routinely maintain it despite those costs. That doesn't prove the beard evolved specifically as an honest signal, but it gives us a plausible evolutionary framework for understanding why a costly trait could persist. And now the story takes an unexpected turn, because if the beard can communicate maturity and age, then its changing color may have been signaling something humans have always associated with both experience. A beard doesn't stay the same forever. For many men, the first hairs appear during adolescence. Then the beard gradually becomes denser. The texture can change. Individual hairs may become thicker. And eventually, something else begins happening. The color starts to fade. A few gray hairs appear. Then more. Until the beard can look completely different from the one a man had in his 20s. At first glance, this might seem like nothing more than aging. But from an evolutionary perspective, visible age can be a surprisingly important piece of information. In a small ancestral community, age could influence social relationships. An older adult might have more experience with the landscape, more knowledge about seasonal food sources, more familiarity with neighboring groups, more experience hunting, navigating, making tools, or caring for children. Age does not automatically mean greater ability, but experience can accumulate over time. And the face is one of the places where that history becomes visible. A gray beard can therefore become a visible marker of adulthood and advancing age. But there is a fascinating contradiction here. If younger males are often competing for status and reproductive opportunities, why would a trait that makes someone look older persist? Because social signals don't have to communicate only one thing. A young adult male might use a beard to appear more mature and physically imposing. An older man may have gray facial hair that others interpret differently, perhaps as a sign of experience, seniority, or simply age. The same biological structure can therefore produce different signals at different stages of life. And humans are unusually sensitive to these visual cues. We automatically make rapid judgments about age, sex, emotion, and social characteristics from faces. That doesn't mean those judgments are always accurate. In fact, they can be badly wrong. But humans evolved in environments where quickly interpreting another person's face could have been useful. A stranger approaching the group was not just another face. He could be a potential ally, a rival, a mate, a threat, or an experienced adult who could provide valuable knowledge. Facial hair became part of that visual information. But there is still a major problem. Modern humans don't live under the same conditions as our ancestors. We can shave, grow a beard, dye it, shape it, trim it, or remove it completely. That means cultural choices can now override much of the original biological signal. And once humans learned that facial hair could be deliberately manipulated, the beard stopped being merely a biological trait. It became a tool we could use to change how other people saw us. For much of human history, controlling facial hair was difficult, time-consuming, and limited by available tools. Humans have been removing facial hair for a very long time, but consistent shaping depended heavily on the tools and grooming practices available in each culture. Once those tools became reliable, something important changed. Facial hair could be managed deliberately. A man could remove it, leave it untouched, trim it, shape it, or create a style that made his face look completely different. Once a physical trait becomes controllable, it can become part of identity. The beard no longer has to communicate only biology. It can communicate choice. Consider two men of the same age. One keeps a full beard, the other shaves every morning. Their biology may be almost identical, yet other people may perceive them very differently. The bearded man may appear older or more rugged. The clean-shaven man may appear younger or more polished. Those impressions aren't guaranteed, but humans routinely use facial appearance to form rapid social judgments, and cultures can build entire systems of meaning around those judgments. The same beard could signal wisdom in one society and rebellion in another. In one era, it could represent authority. In another, it could make a man look outdated. That is the strange power of cultural evolution. Biological evolution changes populations over generations. Cultural evolution can change the meaning of a physical feature within a few decades. Once people could control the trait, they could decide not not only whether to keep it, but what it meant. In ancient Egypt, pharaohs were often depicted with stylized false beards, ceremonial additions associated with kingship and divine authority. The beard had become a symbol rather than simply a biological feature. Even if facial hair originally provided some combination of signaling, protection, or other benefits, humans eventually gave it meanings far beyond biology. We turned biology into communication. But once humans could control facial hair, something even stranger happened. Culture began shaping a trait built into our biology, and eventually, the way a man wore his beard could say more about his society than his genes. Once humans gained control over facial hair, something subtle but powerful happened. The beard stopped being only a biological outcome and started becoming a social expectation. Different societies didn't just interpret beards differently, they began building expectations and rules around them. In some places, a beard signals maturity and respect. In others, it can signal neglect or lack of professionalism. In certain religious traditions, it becomes an obligation. In some workplaces, particular beard styles may be discouraged or restricted for practical or professional reasons. And fashion can swing from admired to unfashionable within a single generation. This is where culture goes beyond meaning and enters pressure. Because a beard is not just a private choice, it is something other people react to. A man with facial hair may be treated differently in a job interview. He may be seen as more authoritative or less polished. He may be encouraged to keep it, or subtly pushed to remove it. In some environments, the pressure is explicit. In others, it is silent but constant, shaped by what is considered normal. So, even though biology gives humans the ability to grow a beard, culture often determines whether that ability is expressed freely or carefully managed. And this is where the story moves beyond simple symbolism. Because now the beard is no longer just a signal. It is part of a social feedback system. People adjust their appearance based on how they are treated. Society reinforces those choices through approval, disapproval, opportunity, or exclusion. The loop is simple. Biology produces facial hair. Culture assigns meaning to it. Social reactions reward or punish that meaning. Individuals adapt their grooming in response. Over time, that loop can dramatically change appearance and grooming patterns across whole societies without requiring any genetic change. That is why beard styles can shift so dramatically across history, not because human biology changes quickly, but because social expectations do. And the answer to why men have beards is probably not singular. Sexual selection may have played a role, competition between males may have influenced perception, hormones clearly control its growth, and culture later layered meaning and social pressure onto the biology. But after everything we've uncovered, maybe we've been asking the wrong question all along. The mystery isn't simply why humans grew beards, it may be why this one patch of hair became powerful enough to influence biology, status, culture, and even the way we see ourselves. At this point, the beard can look almost contradictory. It may make a man appear older, it can influence perceptions of dominance. It may offer limited physical cushioning during certain impacts. Its growth is controlled by hormones and genetics. And culture can transform it into a symbol of religion, authority, fashion, or identity. So, which explanation is the real one? The uncomfortable answer is that evolution does not always produce traits for one neat, isolated purpose. A biological feature can have several effects at the same time. Some may have influenced its evolution, others may have appeared later, and some may simply be consequences of how the trait interacts with the human body. Consider the beard's development. It emerges after puberty, when androgen levels rise. That makes its development closely associated with sexual maturity. And once other people began responding to mature male faces, facial hair could also become socially important. If a beard made a man appear older or more formidable, that perception could influence interactions with rivals. If facial hair provided even limited protection against certain impacts, that could potentially add another advantage. Then culture entered the picture. Humans learned to remove facial hair. They learned to shape it. They created ceremonial beards. They attached religious meanings to it. They turned beard styles into fashion. At that point, whatever combination of evolutionary pressures had shaped the trait was no longer the only thing determining its importance. The beard had become part of human communication, and the beard reveals a broader human pattern. Humans take biological traits and turn them into signals. Hair can become associated with age, religion, profession, fashion, or identity. Body shape, clothing, and other visible traits can also become associated with status, culture, or social role. The biology remains underneath, but culture builds an enormous layer on top. That is why searching for one simple explanation for the beard can be misleading. The beard isn't a message with one fixed translation. Its meaning changes depending on who is looking at it, where they live, what period they live in, and what social rules surround them. A prehistoric rival might have seen a potential threat. An ancient ruler might have seen a symbol of power. A modern employer might see professionalism, or the opposite. A friend might simply see someone's personal style. Same biology, Different interpretation? And if one small patch of hair can carry so many meanings, then the real story of the human beard may not be about hair at all. It may be about how humans learn to turn biology into social information. By now, it's easy to say the beard is complicated and has many explanations. But in evolutionary biology, that is only the beginning. Scientists ask a more specific question. What caused a trait to be favored by natural selection? A trait can exist. A trait can have effects. Those effects can even be useful, but that does not prove they were the reason the trait evolved. Take facial hair. We can observe that beards change how faces are perceived. They can influence judgments of age, dominance, and aggression. Researchers can even test how hair behaves during controlled impacts. But these observations tell us what a beard does, not necessarily why facial hair was favored over evolutionary time. To move from effect to evolutionary cause, scientists need more evidence. They compare populations and species. They look for connections between traits and survival, reproduction, or competition. And even then, conclusions remain cautious. For the beard, several possibilities remain. Sexual selection may have played a role. Male-male competition may have influenced how rivals perceived facial hair. Social signaling may have helped communicate maturity or status. Limited physical protection is another possibility, although evidence does not strongly support it as a primary driver. The important point is that each explanation must be tested against evidence, not assumed because it sounds reasonable. And once a trait exists, culture can reshape its role. Humans can remove it, exaggerate it, or give it meanings far removed from the evolutionary pressures that shaped it. So the beard is a layered system. At the base is biology, hormones, genes, and development. Above that is evolution, pressures that influenced whether the trait persisted, and above that is culture, the changing meanings humans assign to what they see. The beard sits at the intersection of all three. That is why it resists a single explanation, not simply because the evidence is incomplete, but because the question spans multiple levels. And once we understand how biology, evolution, and culture stack together in something as simple as facial hair, a bigger question emerges. What does this reveal about how human beings themselves evolved? The story of the beard may seem like a small question about facial hair, but it actually points towards something much larger. Humans are unusual because biology and culture constantly interact. Evolutionary processes shaped our bodies. But humans learn to modify those bodies, interpret them, and assign meaning to them. The beard is a perfect example. Its growth begins with biology. Genes influence follicle activity. Hormones activate that activity during puberty. Age changes its appearance. And individual variation determines how dense, coarse, or sparse it becomes. But that is only the starting point. Whatever evolutionary pressures shaped facial hair, whether sexual selection, social signaling, or a combination of factors, only help explain why the capacity exists. They don't explain what humans later did with it. Because once a trait exists, humans can turn it into something else entirely. We learn to shave it, trim it, grow it deliberately, style it, and attach meaning to those choices. Authority, maturity, rebellion, wisdom, identity, fashion, none of these meanings are fixed in the hair itself. They are learned, shared, and constantly reshaped by society, and they can change quickly, sometimes within a single generation. That is something evolution alone cannot explain. It requires understanding how humans transmit meaning socially rather than genetically. And this is the deeper pattern the beard reveals. Humans don't only adapt to their environment. We also reshape the meaning of the environment around us. We create rules, we create symbols, we create expectations, and those expectations feed back into how people behave and present themselves. The beard sits inside that loop. Biology produces it. People interpret it. Culture assigns meaning to it. Individuals respond by changing how they wear it, or whether they remove it entirely. Future generations inherit the biology while learning the cultural expectations surrounding it. So when you look at a modern beard, you're not seeing a single trait. You're seeing layers of history stacked on top of each other. Ancient evolutionary pressures, hormonal development, human social perception, thousands of years of grooming, religious traditions, fashion, personal identity, all compressed into a patch of hair along the jaw. And that is why the original question resists a simple answer. Why do humans have beards? Because evolutionary processes shaped the biological capacity to grow them. Because hormones activate that capacity. Because social perception gives facial hair meaning. And because humans are extraordinarily capable of turning biological traits into complex cultural symbols. The beard is not just leftover fur. It is a visible reminder that humans are shaped by both nature and culture at the same time. And perhaps the strangest part isn't that humans can grow beards or that we can remove them. It's that the biology can remain remarkably stable while the meaning attached to it keeps changing. So after all of this, we can finally return to the question we started with. Why do human men grow beards? The most honest answer is not one dramatic explanation. It is a story built from several layers. At the biological level, humans still possess hair follicles across the body. During puberty, androgen hormones cause particular follicles, especially around the chin, jaw, and upper lip, to produce thicker, darker terminal hair. Genetics then influences how strongly those follicles respond. That is why one man can grow a dense beard, while another develops much lighter facial hair. But biology tells us how the beard grows. It doesn't completely tell us why evolution favored the trait. Scientists have considered several possibilities. Facial hair may have played a role in sexual selection. It may have influenced how males perceived one another during competition. It may have acted as a visual signal of maturity or age. And there is some evidence that hair can alter how physical impacts are transmitted, although that does not establish protection as the primary reason beards evolved. The evidence is more complicated than a simple evolutionary slogan. And then humans changed the beard's cultural role. We took control. We developed tools for shaving. We created grooming traditions. We decided when a beard represented dignity, neglect, religion, fashion, maturity, or personal preference. The basic biological system remained remarkably stable while its meaning transformed again and again. And perhaps that's the real realization hidden inside the beard. We were never going to find one single purpose for it because we were asking the wrong kind of question. Evolution doesn't always produce traits with one clean, isolated explanation. Sometimes a feature sits at the intersection of multiple pressures, effects, and outcomes that overlap across time. The beard is one of those features. It doesn't need one meaning to have a fascinating history. The beard began as part of the human body. Then it became part of human behavior. Then part of human identity. And today, it can be all three at once. So when you see a bearded face, you're not looking at one evolutionary answer. You're looking at a biological system shaped by the evolutionary history of our species and a cultural system that has been rewriting its meaning for thousands of years. Not just hair, not just hormones, not just evolution. A reminder that human traits don't always come with one explanation that fits neatly at the end of a sentence. And maybe that's the real answer we were looking for all along. Not why the beard evolved, but why we expected evolution to give it only one reason in the first place.